There's nothing like a warm weekend evening in Orlando, Florida, when the sky is clear, the breeze is blowing through the palm trees, and the smell of grilled meat on a charcoal grill fills the air. I've been looking forward to this evening all week. A proper BBQ with friends gathering, beer pouring over, and best of all, a karaoke performance that I've carefully prepared. I've been busy preparing since the afternoon. The backyard is decked out in rows of bright yellow LED lights, creating a space that shimmers like an outdoor bar. Wooden tables and chairs are neatly arranged, a keg of iced beer is ready in one corner, and on the stove, charred skewers of grilled meat give off a rich, enticing aroma that makes even the neighbors passing by turn to look. The atmosphere gradually gets more lively as groups of friends arrive one by one, bringing wine, salad, and humorous stories from the long week. I turned on some soft background music, waiting for everyone to eat and drink a little before unleashing my secret weapon, and then the moment I had been waiting for arrived. As the sun set, the night sky was covered in a mysterious purple. I reached for my brand new microphone, smiled mischievously, and stepped into the middle of the yard. With a click of the mouse, the big screen lit up and the melody of Living on a Prayer played excitedly. Tonight was mine. The pounding bass mixed with the strong drum beat. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and sang like a real rocker. The whole crowd applauded. Some people immediately stood up and danced. Others raised their beer cans and cheered. The atmosphere was explosive. At that moment, I felt like I was standing on the stage of a music festival, not just a small backyard in this residential area. When I extended the last high note of the song, the whole group of friends clapped loudly, some even whistled to cheer. At this point, everyone was excited, fighting to grab the microphone to choose the next song. I knew that the party had just really begun. However, in the midst of that lively atmosphere, I suddenly noticed an unpleasant gaze from afar. Standing right outside my house fence, arms crossed and observing with a judgmental gaze, Mrs. Linda, the HOA president. Although she had not spoken yet, her expression said it all. She did not like this at all. An ominous premonition flashed through my mind, but at that time I did not know that a real battle with HOA was about to begin. I was enjoying the most wonderful moment when I suddenly felt a cold air. It was Mrs. Linda's cold gaze, the HOA president scanning across the bustling party. She stood there, arms crossed, mouth pursed, as if suppressing a rising anger. Under the yellow glow of the backyard lights, her face was etched with displeasure, her eyes scanning each guest as if she were recording each face for her own personal blacklist. I wasn't surprised. Linda was known as the neighborhood's toughest person, someone who believed that everything had to operate according to the rules, that life had to be orderly and neat, and that there was no room for anything that didn't fit her standards. She was the type of person who would measure the exact height of each house's front lawn and send out warning letters if anyone let it grow beyond the HOA's standards. So, a party with loud karaoke music was clearly outside her comfort zone. I looked at my watch. It wasn't 9 o'clock yet, and there was no law against playing music at this hour. The music wasn't too loud and no one was shouting or causing a disturbance. But of course, that didn't matter to Linda. All she cared about was that she didn't like it, and as always, she would find a way to control it. A few minutes after I finished my performance, there was a frantic knock on the door. I knew what to expect when I opened it. Sure enough, Linda was standing there, arms folded, the authoritative smile of someone who believes she can dictate the rules. She didn't wait for me to respond. Her voice was sharp as a knife. "You are disturbing the neighborhood. This noise is completely unacceptable." I looked at her, trying to keep my composure. Parties in this neighborhood weren't uncommon, but there was one difference: they weren't at my house. The ones thrown by other families were usually peaceful because they were the HOA's favorite residents who followed every rule without question, but not me. I didn't let the HOA control every minute of my life. Linda, we're just having a small party. The music wasn't too loud and it wasn't curfew. What did we do? She narrowed her eyes, her voice colder. It doesn't matter. I warned you. If you don't turn the music off right now, I'll call the police. I bit my lip, stifling a sigh. She was making a big deal out of it, as she always did, but I also knew that once she set her sights on someone, she wouldn't let it go easily. Linda was the type of person who wouldn't stop until she felt she had won. I glanced out into the backyard. My friends were still laughing and joking, oblivious to the tense conversation taking place outside the door. I had two choices: either give in, turn off the music, let the party cool down in discomfort, or continue and let Linda do what she had threatened. I didn't like being threatened. I shrugged nonchalantly, took a step back. No words were needed, no argument was needed. I just crossed my arms, looked at her with a calm gaze as if to say, "Try it, I'm not afraid." Linda pursed her lips, her face darkening as she realized that I wouldn't bow so easily. And then, without another word, she pulled out her phone, dialed a number, and put it to her ear. She was calling the police. I crossed my arms, took a slow sip of beer, my gaze calm. If she thought she could win this time, she was about to be disappointed. Linda held the phone to her ear, her face a triumphant expression, as if she had won a small victory. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her without any intention of stopping her. If she wanted to call the police, let her. I knew I had done nothing wrong, and I had no intention of letting anyone, not even the HOA, stifle my joy in my own home. The silence around me seemed to slow down as the seconds dragged on. I could hear her talking to the operator, her tone more serious than necessary, as if she were reporting a crime rather than a BBQ with some background music. From the emphasis she placed on disorderly conduct and excessive noise, I could tell she was trying to make it sound more serious than it actually was. I glanced toward the backyard where my friends were still chatting and laughing, completely unaware that they were being labeled as troublemakers by the HOA. The music was still playing, but it was loud enough to create a mood, not loud enough to disturb the neighborhood, as Linda had described it to the police. If this was a violation, then there were probably dozens of other parties in the neighborhood that deserved the same punishment. But I was the only one being targeted by the HOA, because I wasn't the type to be easily manipulated. She hung up, turned to me with a defiant look, as if expecting me to panic and immediately turn off the music, end the party, and retreat in defeat. But I wasn't the type to be easily swayed. I held my ground. If she was going to use the police to threaten me, I was going to at least see what they had to say before deciding my next move. She stood there, her eyes fixed on me as if waiting for a response. Perhaps she hoped I would turn off the music, apologize, and promise never to disturb the peace of the neighborhood again. But I had no reason to. My music was within reasonable limits, it wasn't curfew, and this was my home. She might have control over a lot of things in this neighborhood, but my happiness wasn't on that list. Time passed eerily, slowly. I could feel the tension in the air, but instead of being overwhelmed, I was intrigued. I wanted to see what Linda would do next, if she truly believed her HOA had enough power to dictate how I lived in my own home. A small part of me wondered if I should calm things down. But then I remembered how many times she had imposed unreasonable rules on the people who lived here, how many times the HOA had sent out warning letters for trivial things: a car parked a little crooked in the driveway, a potted plant placed in the wrong spot, even a lawn that hadn't been mowed on time. This wasn't just about a party. This was about principle. If I gave in now, nothing would stop the HOA from continuing to control my life. I walked quietly to the backyard, picked up my beer, popped the cap, and took a sip while looking at Linda. If she thought I would be the first to give up, she was wrong. I would wait. I would let the police come, and when they did, I would show them there was nothing here worth their time. I stood there, arms crossed, enjoying the cold beer in my hand as the party continued as if it had never been interrupted. The music was playing at a moderate volume, jokes were exchanged between friends, and here and there glasses clinked as someone suggested a toast. Except for the furious look on Linda's face that was still watching me like a hawk, it was still a perfect evening. Less than 10 minutes later, the red and blue lights of a police car flashed around the corner. 2 officers emerged from the patrol car, calm but professional. They weren't in a hurry or nervous, perhaps because they were used to these calls. One was a partygoer, the other a demanding resident who wanted to control everything around them. They'd seen too many cases like this before, and I bet they knew from the start that this wasn't a serious incident. I wasn't the only one who noticed the police presence. A few of my friends turned to look, but instead of being concerned, they raised their eyebrows in curiosity. No one was shouting, no excessive drinking, and certainly no sign of the kind of disorderly party Linda had described on the phone. 2 officers approached, their eyes scanning the scene before them. They saw a normal party, a group of friends sitting around a table, the smell of grilled meat on a charcoal grill, soft music playing in the background for gossip, and everything proceeding in an orderly fashion. Nothing like a public disorder situation, as Linda had so eloquently stated in her call. I stood still, waiting to see their reaction while Linda quickly stepped forward, giving me a satisfied look before turning to the taller of the 2 officers. She began to talk about how I was disrupting the peace of the neighborhood, how the music and noise disturbed the residents, and how she had warned me but I refused to cooperate. The second officer, who seemed a little less serious, slowly scanned the backyard. I could see the impatience in his eyes, as if he knew this wasn't a problem worth their time. I didn't need to say anything. The scene before them said it all. This was not a wild party, no one was causing a disturbance, and there was certainly no reason for the police to intervene in a perfectly legal event taking place in the backyard of a private home. I caught the eye of the senior officer who seemed to be in charge. He looked at me, then at Linda, then back at the party, and I knew in that moment that I had been right in not backing down. There was a distinct change in the atmosphere as the officer finished his survey of my backyard. He seemed to have come to a conclusion long ago, but he remained professional, taking a moment to make sure there was no legitimate reason to intervene. His eyes swept over each guest, each beer glass, each dish on the table, then settled on the speaker, which was playing music at a moderate volume. There was no commotion, no drunkenness, and most importantly, no sign that this party was disrupting the peace of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, Linda stood close to me, her entire body as tense as an overdrawn string. I didn't need to look to sense her anger. Not at my party, but at the fact that things weren't going her way. She had staked everything on this call, certain that the police would be on her side, would ask me to turn down the music, maybe even break up the party. But that didn't happen. The officer let out a slow breath, then turned to face us. When he spoke, his tone was completely neutral, but I could hear the boredom in it. The boredom of someone who had just been pulled away from a normal shift to deal with a minor problem. He confirmed that there had been no violations. I had known that. I had done nothing wrong in the first place. My music wasn't too loud, my guests weren't disruptive, my party was entirely within the law. If this were a real problem, there would be many people in the neighborhood complaining, not just Linda. The police saw no reason to intervene, because there was no problem to deal with. I stood there, arms still crossed, not saying a word, letting the situation speak for itself. If Linda had hoped that I would be humbled, appalled, or rush to explain, she was disappointed. I had let the law speak for me. She was clearly not happy with the outcome. I could feel her frustration rising as she turned to the officer, trying to find a loophole in his judgment. Perhaps she thought that if she pressed a little harder on my disturbing the peace of the neighborhood, or if she continued to insist that we warned him and he was uncooperative, the police might change their mind. But the law does not operate on personal feelings. The police cannot force me to stop the party or turn down the music when no violations have occurred. This is not an HOA. This is not a set of rules that Linda can manipulate at her discretion. An awkward silence fell as the officer shook his head slightly, saying nothing more. Linda stood there as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. I looked at her for a second, then calmly picked up my beer, took a sip, and remained silent as if the whole situation had never happened. The party continued behind me. The laughter, the music, the smell of meat on the charcoal grill still filled the air. Nothing had changed, but one thing had. Linda had just realized that she couldn't control everything in this neighborhood, at least not tonight. I stayed where I was, watching silently as the officer slowly turned his head to look at Linda. The moment only lasted a few seconds, but I could feel the change in the air. The tension was no longer between me and her. It was now directed toward Linda and the people she believed would be on her side. I had been waiting for this from the moment the police showed up, but seeing it happen actually gave me a special sense of satisfaction. The tall officer, who was clearly in charge of the situation, stood tall, arms crossed over his chest. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of weariness mixed with sternness as he stared at Linda. If he had been trying to remain neutral before, I could sense a palpable unease in his every move. Linda, who had been absolutely confident in her HOA authority only a few minutes before, now froze. I could see the hesitation in her eyes, a wavering between the conviction that she was doing the right thing and the slow realization that the odds were stacked against her. She must have thought the police would arrive, immediately order me to turn off the music, break up the party, and hand her a resounding victory in front of the entire neighborhood. Instead, they not only refused to stand by her, but also put her on the defense. The atmosphere seemed to become more tense. Even the guests at the party began to notice the situation. Some people quietly looked at me, waiting to see what would happen next. I could see a few smiles, a few amused glances. Clearly, I wasn't the only one in the neighborhood who was tired of Linda's unreasonable interference. She finally spoke, but her tone was no longer the arrogant confidence it had been before. It was quieter, weaker, lacking the authority she always tried to project over others. I didn't have to hear every word to understand that she was trying to back away, looking for a way to retreat without losing too much face. But I also knew that from this moment on, she had lost. The police didn't stay long. They had no reason to. When they left, I knew that Linda wouldn't be there much longer either. There was an awkward silence as she turned and walked away. No more threats or provocative looks, and as soon as the gate closed behind her, I lifted my beer, took a slow sip, and turned back to my friends. The party wasn't over, and I had no reason to stop. Linda paused, her eyes wavering. It was as if she'd just realized that she'd gotten herself into a corner, and now there was no way out but to retreat in silence. The atmosphere around her was strangely heavy, no longer the tension between us. Now, all that was left was humiliation. I could see the frustration on her face, the way her jaw tightened, her lips pressed into a straight line, as if she were trying to contain an unexpressed anger. She was used to having control over everything in this neighborhood, but this time things were getting out of hand. I stood still, arms crossed, making no move to respond or try to calm the situation. I didn't need to say anything. It was my silence that annoyed her the most. If I had spoken up, if I had reacted angrily or argued, she might have had the opportunity to continue this situation, to find a reason to feel right. But when I didn't, she had lost any crutch to hold on to the illusion of power she had tried to impose on me. Everything happened slowly. She took a deep breath, as if trying to regain her last shred of composure, and then turned away without another word. No threats, no warnings, no more of her usual authoritative tone, just a cold turn and heavy footsteps leaving my house. I watched her walk away, step by step, her back straight but somehow tense and forced. If this were a movie, it would be the scene where the music slows down and the villain leaves the battlefield in the humiliation of a loser. No one said anything as she left, but I could feel the eyes of those around her. Some of my friends looked at each other, some tried not to laugh, and a few simply shook their heads at the unreasonable control that HOA always tried to impose. The police said nothing more. They didn't need to. They had done their job, they had seen the truth, and they had let it all end the way it had to. They exchanged a brief nod, then walked silently back to their patrol cars, leaving me with a sweet victory I didn't have to fight for. The gate to my house closed, and with it the entire HOA presence disappeared into the night. I relaxed my shoulders, lifted my beer can, touched it to the corner of my mouth, and stifled a smile as I felt the feeling of victory without having to say a word. Not because I had taken down anyone, but because I had refused to be controlled by a system that relied on imposed power rather than actual law. And then, as soon as my gate closed, a round of applause rang out from the backyard. Not a loud cheer, not a teasing, but a soft but meaningful approval. A few people raised their glasses, a few whistled softly, and I knew that everyone had seen what had just happened. I stood there for a moment, still holding the cold beer can, my eyes scanning my friends. They were still sitting in their chairs, still leaning comfortably against the table, still looking eager, as if just waiting for the signal for the real party to continue. The brief silence that fell was not because we were afraid, but because we all understood that we had just won a small but meaningful victory. I put down my beer and headed towards the karaoke system, feeling the excitement starting to wash over us. If the HOA thought they could dampen our spirits, they were wrong. I swiped through the playlist, my eyes landing on a familiar name. We Will Rock You. A song that captured the spirit of the moment. A song that needed no explanation, just to feel and get into the rhythm. I pressed the button to select the song. The first drum notes rang out, slow, powerful, forming a familiar rhythm that everyone could recognize immediately. I didn't have to say anything, didn't have to call out, because in an instant the whole backyard responded. Feet stomped on the ground, hands clapped rhythmically on the wooden table. The boom-boom clap sound spread rhythmically and excitedly. Laughter erupted from a few of my friends, not because of the song, but because of the sense of victory that crept through the clapping. I gripped the microphone, not to sing, but to make this moment a clear statement. We were not controlled, we were not limited, and the night was not over. The first verse rang out, strong, full of energy, accompanied by a synchronized clap from everyone. The entire backyard seemed to transform into a small stage where no one cared about HOA, about unreasonable rules, about prying eyes. We only had each other, the music, and a long night ahead. When the chorus came, I raised my hand, and without a signal, everyone joined in, shouting the words as if we were part of a giant crowd at an outdoor concert. Laughter, clapping, and clinking beer glasses joined in the energetic melody, creating a moment none of us would forget. I glanced over the fence, where the lights from the other houses still shone through the windows. I wondered if someone was peeking through the curtains, frustrated at not being able to control us. or if someone was sitting in the living room smiling quietly at how the HOA had just failed at something simple but powerful, the joy they couldn't suppress. The song ended in a burst of applause and whistles. No one sat still. Everyone stood up, started dancing to the new beat, refilled their glasses with beer, and continued the party as if nothing had happened before, and I, standing in the middle of it all, looked around and smiled. I hadn't just kept my party going. I'd kept a little bit of freedom in my own home. I stood in the middle of the yard, took a deep breath, and felt the freedom I had regained in my own home. Why should we let unreasonable rules dictate our lives? If we are not doing anything wrong, if we are just enjoying precious moments with our loved ones, then why should we give in to those who want to control us? What about you? Have you ever had someone try to stifle your joy? Are you willing to stand up for your memorable moment? Share your story and tell me. If you were me, what would you do? If you agree that life is for enjoyment, please like, comment, or share this story with people who also need a little freedom in this world full of strict rules. And most importantly, never let anyone decide your joy but yourself.